Hello, and welcome back to Vox Popcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable of pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with my co-hosts, Katya and Hannah. How's it going, guys?
Better than it was last week.
Better?
It's a world. It's a
I feel like every time I say like things, I'm like, oh,
that.
Yeah. I'm just always hesitant to say that things are going better, though. I'm hesitant to say things are better because it feels like jinxing everything. Because what's the thing going around of like 2021 is 2020 with bangs?
Yeah.
Which, as a person with bangs, I resent that.
My favorite was just that it's like, month 13.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which feels more appropriate.
Yeah.
But we were gifted with the Bernie meme.
Yes.
It is a great Bernie meme. Also, I will say the Knitters of the Universe responded quickly. And I think within probably less than 24 hours, there was several patterns available for making your own Bernie mittens.
Oh, so I was kind of annoyed with them, but then they started getting clever. But my favorite one is not from the classic Bernie meme pose. My favorite from the classic Bernie meme pose is him in a MMA match. We're doing an armbar, but my favorite without the classic Bernie meme pose is there's a shot of him earlier walking down the stairs trying to find his loan chair, and he's got the mittens on. He's got a manila envelope in one hand, in one page. It's got his mask on and everything. And it just says, and his, brown coat and jeans. And it says, Bernie is dressed like the inauguration was on his to-do list for today, but it's not the only thing on his to-do list for today.
Yeah. There was another one that's it looks like Bernie's going to go mail a package and this is a minor inconvenience.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Someone edited that photo and they put the knives out to script on the envelope, and Ryan Johnson was like, yeah, I've been waiting for notes for that.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it. It's just I just imagine him going, okay, I've got the inauguration, but I've also got to mail this letter. I got a bill to write. I got a podiatrist appointment, and I got to go grocery shopping on the way home. And I'm only making one trip. So
also TBH is also probably at some level true. Bernie's got stuff to do. The world's on fire.
Right.
Yep. I mean, some people I assume at least some of us watched the inauguration on our lunch break or had on in the background while we did other things.
I had it on all day. Yes. Which kind of segues into our topic.
Which, yes. So I suggested this topic, which is pandemic TV. So we've been talking about how our viewing has changed since the pandemic, but we haven't talked a whole lot about how the pandemic has affected the films and TV shows being made right now and their airing schedule, and even just what the storylines look like. And I thought that we should do it. And then after we posted the blog and booked our guest, hi Mary, welcome back to the show.
Hey Mary.
My sister is back because she watches more TV than I do. Probably has better things to say about it. Then I realized, I wonder how good this is going to be because we're in it. Like the people trying to create these shows are in it. And where does addressing something as horrific and traumatic and terrible as the pandemic fit in with long-term viability? And also as you live history, how can you figure out how to write around it or about it depending on your decision? Because some TV shows are not addressing the pandemic at all, and some are just saying, all right, let's integrate it in with varying success. So that's what we're doing today. We're talking about how things have changed, including the inauguration. So,
well, there's two decisions. There's three decisions, because one thing is, the inauguration, which is just real life. And the inauguration is, essentially it was a news event, right? So it had to change because it had to change. We are living in a world where they had to make adjustments, and they were sort of fascinating to watch. And then you got shows that are addressing it and sort of writing into the plot line. That's probably what we'll talk about most. But I want to touch briefly on the shows that are ignoring it, because I find that to be sort of a fascinating thing. I was watching an interview on Kevin Smith's podcast. He interviewed Skylar Astin, who is most famous for the Pitch Perfect movies, but he's on a TV show called Zoe's Infinite Playlist, which is lovely and delightful, actually. But he talked about they made a decision to not address it because they want their show to sort of be like, they've got their story that they're telling, and it's not necessarily in any specific year. They're thinking of it as a show that, 10 years, 15 years down the line, people might, discover on Hulu or Netflix, and they don't want it to be about the pandemic. They want it to be this cute little love story that they were already telling. So they've just had to take a lot of precautions off screen to, basically create a world where he could record the show and essentially you not know if you're watching it outside of the pandemic. And he said it's funny because, they're living their lives. Their set is they're in an office building. So they're hanging out in the office. And he says, if you move the camera 6 inches to the left, it would look like, a hazmat room. Because he said all the cameramen are geared up, everything's spaced out. And he just talked about, he takes a COVID test literally every day. He gets temperature checks several times a day. So, yeah, I find that interesting as well.
Well, and I think there's we even talked about this, even though we're not dealing with the health aspect. I think there's also two camps of thought in terms of why you wouldn't want to address the pandemic. It's there is a level where we're being inundated with media that's kind of I think we've used the phrase before the podcast, trauma porn, where you're constantly watching to see what happens next. And it's a heightened state of anxiety. Whereas if you're trying to make a show that, especially one that's more, more about levity and more comedic, I could totally see there being a conscious decision of no, people need space away from that. So even though it is important to have media that's sort of addressing the moment that we're living in, it's equally as important to have media that isn't constantly shoving that experience in your face when you, particularly because it is for most of us on some level, definitely to greater degrees for some than others, a traumatic event that we're all living through. I know on the show, we've talked about the balance of how much we address pandemic specific stuff and COVID stuff, as well as politics in sort of the larger context of also the silly things that we do.
This is also weird because as a lot of reporters have pointed out in their own journalism pieces, some of which I linked to on the blog when I wrote this post introducing this concept of pandemic TV for the show, they a lot of events don't actually get chronicled in TV shows. 9/11 was not super heavily addressed. And in fact, TV shows change their plot lines. When there are shootings, TV shows will stop airing something, or movie premieres will get delayed, even if it's not specifically correlated to the mass shooting event. And I am wondering, is there kind of an equivalent where something horrific on this mass scale has been addressed in such quick terms by television films? Yeah, quick terms, because we obviously World War II has a bunch of things.
It wasn't that immediate. World War II, most of the World War II media happened, with the exception of Casablanca, which was finished when we actually entered World War II. The story was done, and then they rewrote the ending. They did reshoots on Casablanca in post because Casablanca launched, it premiered just after America had officially entered the war. So the most famous scene in Casablanca, that airport scene where she gets on the plane and she says, here's looking at you, and we'll always have Paris. And he tells Louis that this looks like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. That's all shot as reshoots. That was all done literally in a week, 2 months after they'd finished filming the movie, because they were trying to make it more current. But most of the examples I can think of are, years later, or at least a year later, right? There were a lot of war movies that came out after World War II, and Vietnam we dealt with over the next decade on television. And a lot of times in allegory, right? We did MASH, which was about Korea, but it was really about Vietnam. So there were a lot of things like that, and the Rambo movies and all this stuff. But 9/11, there were a few changes, but mostly it was delays, and a lot of TV shows. Friends, you'd never know 9/11 happened. You just we're not going to talk about that.
How much of that is also that production processes are faster? Are shows more able to pivot faster than they would have been, for example, like in the 40s.
Depends on the show. I mean, like I Love Lucy, they were writing those that week. Desilu's production timeline was days long. They were just writer's room to on stage. But I also think things like an I Love Lucy, where, you know, you're really addressing things in real time, the stories that you want to do. Simpsons does this.
That's a show that's like in some ways designed to do that.
Right. South Park does that today. But I think those shows are, you know, they're going for levity as opposed to, you know, I mean, if you're watching something that ran forever, Bonanza doesn't address current life because it happened in the past. Right. And they've got a dramatic storyline that they're trying to tell. And you know, any soap opera has a dramatic storyline that it's trying to tell. And you have to really make that choice. You know, I know, Hannah, you want to talk about Grey's Anatomy, for instance. Yeah, it could have done it.
Two shows that I feel like in some ways felt that they had to responsibly address the pandemic were Superstore, which is an NBC comedy that focuses on retail workers at what is the equivalent to a Walmart, and Grey's Anatomy, which is the long-running ABC medical drama that focuses on the surgical wing of a Seattle hospital. And two very different ways of addressing the pandemic. Superstore is a comedy, and so they address it by, you know, making jokes, but like facing it head on. I mean, Superstore has always been a show, and I feel like I am the only one who's really watched it in depth on this podcast, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen like 3 or 4 of them.
Grey's Anatomy?
Superstore.
Oh, Superstore. Sorry.
You guys should totally watch it. It has like a long running unionization plot line. Like, I've always wanted to talk about the show, and I'm so sad because this is actually, the NBC decided not to renew it for season 7, so this is the last season, and I'm just kind of upset that like we're going to be leaving these characters in a pandemic. And like they, you know, it's addressing like what retail workers are going through head on. They directly talk about like corporate policies and lack of wages and like the problems facing workers who aren't in a union. And the season has also, you know, tackled issues of racism and how that might uniquely play out in big box chain stores and corporate policies. And they also like, you know, have everyone wearing masks because, again, it's a pandemic. Although sometimes I've noticed this with Grey's Anatomy, too. Sometimes the characters like will take off their masks in like the hallway to talk. And it really kind of bothers me because I'm like, maybe it's just because I'm packing. I'm like, but wouldn't you be wearing a mask because you're at work? And it's super dangerous. And I know that like they want people to be able to see the characters on screen, but
also I would imagine
strange.
Sound. I don't know. Like, I wonder how hard it is like to maintain sound quality too with masks and everything.
You can do it. It sounds. I mean, they sound muffled like they're wearing a mask, which I guess is kind of realistic. But also, there is the trade off.
I was thinking more for like clarity purposes. Yeah.
Right. You want to be able to hear people, and like you're not. You know, I mean, you're paying money for famous actors because people like to look at them. Right. So I understand. And I understand Hannah's point of view, too, though. Does it send the right message just to be like, oh, look, Meredith Grey is so pretty? You know,
even message aside, like, I also find it really weird. I was scrolling through the Instagrams and looking at the TikToks this morning. And like, I think at this point, it's also like I find it weird to look at images of people doing things without masks that I know are supposed to be like our present day.
Yeah.
Or like and by present day, I mean in the last several years. So they're not necessarily like during the time of pandemic. Like, it's weird to watch TV shows that are set like in the general present and see people not in masks because that's just not our experience right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And honestly, like I remember Grey's Anatomy from when I first began watching it when it came out, and I introduced Mary to it, which honestly I'm not sure if that was like the best idea given our ages. But it's insane.
How old were you when that started?
Mary, how old were you? I was in high school.
In middle school,
that maybe. Fine.
Okay, that's not as bad.
I started watching like sexy soaps in like middle school.
Yeah, I knew a lot of people that started watching Grey's Anatomy in high school. That's not okay. Anyway.
I got students today who are 18 and are like, "Oh yeah, I've watched it my entire life." So you know.
Yeah, well, you know, like it's like showing like a 13-year-old Game of Thrones. Like, should you?
Yeah. Yes. It's lovely. You learn so much.
Well, you know, but So I introduced Mary to Grey's Anatomy, and actually I will say that I revisited the early season of Grey's Anatomy earlier this year because I was like, oh, this is like something to take my mind off the pandemic, and I like quit like somewhere around season 7, but Mary's been faithful and watched all the way through. It's like season 16 now?
Season 17 currently.
Yeah, season 17. Seen every episode, every season faithfully.
And how would you describe this season as compared to the previous seasons and the show overall?
You know, it's weird because like there's a lot happening in Grey's right now. I mean, Meredith is on a vent. Doctors are getting sick. Doctors have lost family and friends. There's like a child trafficking storyline. But at the same time, it just feels very almost boring. It's like, you know, it's like watching the news at some level. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like watching the news, but it's kind of like they're stuck doing the same thing all the time. And there's really just not much that's been happening. You know, like Meredith has COVID, okay, and she's just had COVID the whole time. And it's just bizarre because we're so used to Grey's Anatomy, like bombshell, bombshell, bombshell. And that's not really what's been happening this season.
It felt like I watched the 6-ish episodes that were out, so we could talk about it intelligently. But it like I read some of the production changes, and they said that, you know, they had longer scenes with fewer actors because of production guidelines, and you can really tell when like it's pointed out to you because I watched it on Hulu, right? So like the commercial break comes at the end of one like 10-minute scene where it's just two people talking to each other, which I actually like think some of those scenes are really well done, and they give an opportunity for like character building, or for Grey's Anatomy to address like very specific things about the pandemic, like how it disproportionately affects Black and brown people. I think that they're, you know, probably educating a large swath of their audience who maybe doesn't read the news as much as, say, news junkies like us. But it's just very strange where like you compare it to other seasons where it's like cutscene because they're trying to, you know, catch up with their very large cast. Mm-hmm. And then there's the weird. It's just strange to watch a character who you've known for almost 20 years, even though I haven't watched, get vented, which is where sorry for spoilers if you're not watching Grey's Anatomy, that's where we left Meredith Grey before the show went on its break until March.
So now they get 3 months to decide, or 2 months to decide whether or not, you know, she'll survive and get vaccinated and stuff, or I'm
sure she's going to survive, but they've dealt with her storyline by like having her be on this beach and introducing characters who have died, so they can have little moments together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know McDreamy came back.
Mm-hmm. And George,
which by the way is interesting because like this used to be a show about just, you know, watching guys with abs take their shirts off, and now it's like let's talk about COVID. It is, which is not. I mean, that's not fair. I'm teasing it because, you know, Shonda's always tried to be sort of socially relevant, but you know, it is weird that that's where this show started, and now, you know, for everything we're like, well, this is a serious show, so we know we've got to take, you know, we've got to look at these serious issues, and it's like, I guess, but really, it was a show predicated on let's lust after McDreamy and McSteamy. I mean, it was that's where it started.
Is there more pressure for like a medical drama to address COVID though? I mean, okay, I am not a connoisseur of the medical drama genre. Like, are there other shows in this universe that are like ignoring COVID? I guess it's like, it seems like a genre where it'd be particularly difficult to ignore.
I can answer that a little bit because it's weird because Grey's Anatomy is probably the most popular medical drama on the air right now, right? But and I don't know what the other nighttime medical dramas are, but I did go and just catch up on a couple of episodes of one of my, you know, actually I haven't been watching it regularly in years, but I used to be a huge Days of Our Lives fan, and Days of Our Lives, obviously a soap opera, but it is a soap opera based around, you wouldn't know it from the title, but most of the characters, or about half the characters, work at a hospital. A lot of them are doctors. General Hospital obviously was like that, but Days has a big hospital plot as well, and they're not addressing it, which is odd because it seemed like this would be, since it's happening in the now, and since nobody, you know, with a soap opera, a daytime soap, you're not really that worried about people going back and catching reruns. You're just addressing the now constantly. Mm-hmm. it seems like an obvious thing to do. And I didn't watch a lot, so maybe they are addressing it somewhat. Oh, no, they did mention it. They did say that they're okay. It's not as heavily addressed as I thought, because now that I think about it, there was a scene where they're like, oh, I haven't seen so and so in so long, but we all have to be careful now with the social distancing. So they did say that in one scene, but for the most part, they're not addressing it from their storylines, because they've got to focus on all of the, the love triangles and, the general soap opera drama is taking precedence over the medical stuff. What I did find interesting about it is, and this is sort of a more technical thing. There are, Hannah, you were talking about the 10-minute scenes. What's great about Days is, obviously it's a soap. There's a lot of love scenes, and there's a lot of love scenes where you only see the back of people's heads. And so I read up on it. Like, that didn't used to be true. What they did was they took the entire, all the cast who were married, they hired all their spouses. And so they bring in the spouse to play the love interest for the kissing scenes and the love scenes. And they just put them in a wig.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, OK, well, we can't not have your character in bed with her husband. So can your husband act? OK, we'll put a wig on him, and all he's got to do is, lay there shirtless and kiss you. And then we'll bring back in, the regular actor for after that's over, just so that you can, and it was like, oh, this is fascinating. And that's just how they're shooting their love scenes, which there are fewer of, but they're doing it with stand-ins of whoever your real life partner is.
Huh. And Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like there was much less romance. Physical, actually romance and physical, kissing or sex scenes in Grey's Anatomy this season.
Yeah, definitely.
And are they writing around it, or they're busy fighting COVID?
There's some of it, but it's not like usual. There's a scene where Amelia and Link are in their backyard, and he's set up a tent, and she's like, we can't get close to each other, and he's like, well, I can think of something else we can do. So, they're addressing it, but they're still keeping actors far apart.
Wait a minute. So there are a couple on the show?
Yes.
Why can't they get close to each other? Presumably they would be in each other's pod.
Amelia went into the hospital for a consultation.
Okay. So now they're quarantining apart. I see.
Yes. Yeah. And I think she's living in a tent in the backyard, or at least, decontaminating.
So did it break down because the way you explained it was like, I can think of something else we can do. Sounds like they're doing this creepy thing where they're masturbating their binoculars or something. Or what? Did he mean something else? Because
that's the vibe I got. What I'm remembering is that's the vibe, but they're both in the backyard. So they're distanced. Okay. Yeah. While she is, really protecting her family.
So it really was kind of a, no, we're going to masturbate at a distance kind of scene. Because you said it like that, and I'm like, that's clearly not how that's supposed to be. But no, that's what it is. Okay, got it.
Hannah, do you remember? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't want to say, because I'm not sure. I remember that. I will say that there's another couple, Maggie and her long distance boyfriend, and so most of the episodes you just see them talking to each other on the phone. So there's some of that too, and I feel like they put off giving Meredith a love interest by sending her to the beach. I think that they're addressing COVID through the main character on purpose and very purposefully, but also I think that they're just giving people different storylines because. Well, and Mary, would you also say, because you've watched the show faithfully, that this season also feels way more directly political than previous seasons? They're talking specific statistics every episode. Yeah, it's always been socially aware.
Yeah, but it's all being put on Maggie. I feel Maggie and Miranda Bailey. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and I think maybe a little bit with Catherine.
Yeah.
Which is partially because she shares some scenes with Maggie, which for those of you who don't watch Grey's Anatomy, they're Miranda Bailey and Maggie are the two major Black female characters. So it makes sense why they would do that to some degree, but also.
So aside from Grey's, are there, what other show? We talked about Superstore a little bit, and there's Grey's. What about shows? And because I know, Mary, you said you watched The Bachelor. How are they handling it? Because this is a show which is I mean, okay, for those who haven't watched The Bachelor before, the entire point of the show is let's watch pretty people hook up in exotic locations, neither of which are good ideas right now.
Which I think we should back up to The Bachelorette. Because that is the first thing that aired.
Either show. I mean, they're effectively the same show, but yes, either one.
Which I think and Mary can say more. I think that they changed the tone a little bit from The Bachelorette to The Bachelor. But Mary, if you want to talk about how it changed and what's going on.
Yeah. So The Bachelorette aired, I guess, in the fall, and it was bizarre. Like, it felt very heavy-handed with addressing COVID, with Claire, the original Bachelorette, kept saying what a sacrifice for these men to quarantine for 14 days and constantly get tested so they can try to find love with me. And, there was much more. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Which also, I want to say that, it must be very hard to strike the right tone for any show trying to address COVID, but also
you're in a mansion.
Read the room, people. As somebody who, has been very fortunate during the pandemic, family members haven't gotten seriously ill. I'm still employed. I was like, are you kidding me? There are people out there with real problems. And you're just like, what a sacrifice these men are making to come live in this fancy resort.
And she was sobbing because she originally thought she couldn't be the Bachelorette because production originally shut down. And so she was like, I thought I'd lost my chance. And I get it. We've all lost opportunities we're excited about or things we wanted to do, but also, it was not great. So instead of traveling places, they all are in one spot.
Yeah. So they're all, at least in The Bachelorette, they all lived at a La Quinta resort. And, the men all had their individual rooms to begin with. And, all the dates were on the resort. It was very bizarre. And I felt at the beginning very heavy-handed until Claire unexpectedly ended her season early after 2 weeks and got engaged to Dale, one of the contestants.
And now they've broken up. Unsurprising to
shocking
no one.
Who could have predicted?
But actually, a lot of people, there are rumors that this season was affected by COVID in another sense, because while Claire and Dale did not talk, he was cast before production shut down. So maybe she developed some sort of interest in him by stalking his social media.
Yeah, there were definite rumors that because production was shut down, that Claire and the men both had time to kind of stalk each other on social media.
Yeah. And perhaps even talk, even though that was denied on the show, right?
Okay.
I watched it because I knew we would talk about this, because it is one of the reality TV shows that was able to figure out, I use the term loosely, how to remain in production, unlike, Amazing Race, which is just sort of done for now. But it was too much for me. I had to fast forward. And then they replaced her with a second Bachelorette.
Tayshia. I felt Tayshia was much more, Claire felt very heavy-handed. And Tayshia was just I'm so grateful to have been given this opportunity. I recognize how insane this is, but let's go for it. And she ended up getting engaged at the end of the show as well.
We'll see if that, I won't.
I will say, watching Tayshia and Zach's proposal, I cried. It felt like the most genuine experience I have seen on The Bachelor, Bachelorette to date.
There's a whole nother show in this.
Yeah. Sorry, we're getting derailed.
For The Bachelor was different. So go ahead.
Yeah, The Bachelor feels much more like it usually does. They obviously address that everybody's been quarantining and tested, and you'll occasionally see a producer in a mask if, the camera shots go that way. But it feels much more like a regular season. I think they realized that, being so heavy-handed with the pandemic maybe was not what their audience wanted to see.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's watching The Bachelor for reality, right? That's not I know it's called reality TV, but that's not the appeal of these shows, is let's watch people deal with the same problems that I have. No, right. That's not what I turned it on.
And how do they first introduce us to the pandemic in The Bachelor?
I don't remember.
They have an opening shot of one of the contestants coming to meet the Bachelor, and she has something hidden behind her back, and she's like, this has gotten me through quarantine. I've felt like I've come, like, this has like been with me. I'm hoping that like you can like fill like I don't want to say that because of what I'm about to say. I hope that you can be a replacement, I guess. And then she pulls out a dildo, or vibrator, which the production censors, which I feel like maybe it's just a network TV thing, but I feel like it's The Bachelor. Like, if you're going to use this to introduce your show, I don't know why you're censoring that because you're The Bachelor, but okay. And so they like get back to like it feels like ABC has always kind of marketed The Bachelor as being like pushing the envelope. We're sexy, and they like address quarantine through a vibrator.
Yeah, and I will say something that has changed with COVID and The Bachelor, Bachelorette is, occasionally in a normal season, they would have a date in front of a live audience where maybe they have to write a song and sing it in front of like a crowd full of strangers or something like that. And now your live audience, when you're on a date, is the other women or men in the house. And so,
fun.
Yeah, an added layer
you made
of drama.
out with last week. Yeah,
exactly. So this past week, the group date was the women had to write erotic stories about The Bachelor and read them in front of a live audience, which was the other women.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's okay. This is why I can't watch these shows.
So just to look at other reality shows, I mean, you mentioned Amazing Race just had to cease production because there is just no way to do that show. Like, the entire concept is we're not staying in one place. So you just can't do it. I don't know what Survivor is doing right now. I have watched some other game shows. I watched The Masked Singer, which did a very odd thing in which they are recording it in front of the judges, who are now farther apart than they used to be. And then they've got no studio audience. So they're using clips of people applauding or cheering from previous seasons, which they're splicing in. And then The Masked Dancer, their new spinoff, which has never been recorded in front of a studio audience, is doing the same thing. And it's just odd, right? Like, I've also seen other, I've seen some game shows. They're doing stuff like, let's space the podiums out. All the sets got wider. The hosts are never anywhere near any of the contestants. And so people are addressing it in oddly visual ways, right? Like it makes for sort of off-putting things. I don't know why Masked Singer chose to do it the way they did, because I am painfully aware that the audience is not there the entire time, and I find it more of a distraction. I've seen obviously sports have been doing this. Pro wrestling has a thing where the WWE has set up a thing where you can buy a virtual ticket and then you get to watch it and you get to watch it on your computer, and then your face might appear in the crowd, where they've got these they've got flat screen TVs in the stadium. So you can just see people on their couches in the audience, which is odd. So sometimes I just wonder if it's even worth addressing, right? Like, would it have just been better to just leave that out? Because I find that creepy.
Yeah, same thing with, I think, soccer. My husband Charlie watches it a lot, and they have an option, no crowds are there. And they have an option where you can choose to watch it the way it is, which is eerily quiet, or you can choose to pipe in crowd noise from previous games.
Like on the internet, you press a button and you decide whether you want crowd noise or not.
I think so. Yeah. Weird. I think it may depend on where you're streaming it. But yeah, one day he was like, look at this, and turned off the crowd noise, and it was bizarre. Yeah,
it is. Sports that have played in front of no crowd, it is very, very different, right? So one thing that with the wrestling thing, for instance, I watched it when the pandemic first started, and I've watched it recently, and they're getting better at it. But when it first switched over, it was sort of none of the wrestlers are used to performing in front of nobody. Right. So if they're giving a speech, they're yelling just like they normally would, because that's just how you cut a promo. But I'm like, who are you yelling at? There's no one there. What are you doing? You've got a microphone, but it's a different kind of performance acting than anybody's trained to do. And, just for the NFL and for baseball, different stadiums addressed it different ways. So some people had empty arenas and some didn't. And it's just odd, right? Like it's just you listening to people, watching people play a game where it's just completely silent other than like, oh, look, you can hear the ref talking. That's weird because there's no other sound.
Yeah. Which, oh, by the way, Survivor, I wanted to say, is apparently scheduled to film in spring of this year. But who knows if that'll happen because, new contagious strands.
Well, but that's one you actually could do. If you quarantined the entire cast for like 3 or 4 weeks before and literally quarantined them, then just drop them on the island. Like you can effectively bubble off Survivor, right? Because if you can take people are healthy to a location where they can't interact with anybody else, that should be fine.
I think I haven't actually seen the current season. I kind of think that's what they did with RuPaul's Drag Race, the one that's airing now.
Okay. They just forced them to quarantine before. I mean, if you force them to quarantine long enough before the show starts. Yeah. Right.
Because I think also RuPaul's Drag Race, like, I don't know how exactly it works because I'm not that much of a, I don't know things. I don't actually know things. But like they're supposed to keep it secret that they're on the show. And I think it's kind of like reality TV where they like live in a house together, even though that's not part of the show. They're kind of like, even during normal times, sort of quarantined off because they don't, I think it's like the idea is they don't want it until they release the promo videos and whatever. They don't want it known who, like who's on the show.
That's how Survivor is. When Survivor, it's just when you get voted off the island in Survivor, you don't. Typically, you don't actually go home. You get voted off, and then you go hang out at the hotel that you.
Ponderosa. You go to Ponderosa, and they have a they started a YouTube series. Like I don't remember what season, but you can watch like mini videos of like people after they leave the island and they're on Ponderosa. And it gets really funny when like one person's like, I hate this woman. I will never speak to her. And then the next thing you know, they're like hanging out on the beach, like laughing, having a good time. Anyway, that just shows you how much Survivor I've watched this pandemic. But, like Great British Bake Off did something similar for their latest season. They all quarantined together and had to like get their ingredients like shipped in. And it was a season.
Yeah, it's those things you can adapt for. I'm curious about, we talked a little bit about this with Grey's, but what about other shows that are addressing it? Because one of the ones that I've been watching is Law and Order Svu, and they've been addressing it. Their entire thing has always been ripped from the headlines, so they're addressing it by just, they're playing cops in New York City. So they wear masks because they can. Now, they also have the problem that Hannah was complaining about, which is when they're just hanging out at the station, they'll just take their masks off, which is just because people want to see Mariska Hargitay and Ice-T, I guess. We hired these actors for what they look like, but they mostly go on calls and they'll have masks on, and then they'll go to they've had plots that have been dealing with the pandemic directly, like, somebody ends up murdered and it's a bunch of roommates and, they're like, well, I don't know who it could be. We haven't seen anybody because we've been quarantining, so things like that. They've been trying to like sort of deal with things as they would occur. They've also been dealing with a lot of fallout from the George Floyd, protests and everything. So they've had some racial storylines going on. So that's one way where I feel like they're at least doing it responsibly. But their show is crafted in such a way as that it just makes sense, sort of like Grey's Anatomy.
And I do like there are other shows that I don't really watch that are doing this, like This Is Us, for example. And actually, so Mary, you do watch.
Oh, yes. Huge This Is Us fan.
Do you like this season?
It's definitely different, but yeah. I think that they, in my opinion, have handled COVID and even their like addressing of the Black Lives Matter movement has been one, it went well. It didn't just come out of left field, it kind of fit into the storyline they were building. But I think that they've done a really great job addressing it and, not making it feel, like in Grey's Anatomy, like we talked about, sometimes it feels like Maggie is just like rattling off statistics every episode. But I think they've done a really great job of making it more a part of the character storyline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I cannot comment because I've not seen this season because This Is Us made me cry every single episode on a normal show, and I just
good. Good cries.
do it. But there's also like there's the shows that are completely ignoring it. There are the shows that are addressing it and agreeing it heavily. And then there are the shows that are semi-addressing it. Like Katya asked about medical shows that are they ignoring it? The Good Doctor, which I do not watch, but I know they had like a very special COVID episode. And basically,
tonight on a very special blossom.
That was just for you, Mav. And then they moved on to like post-pandemic storylines. And then I did something I'm ashamed of. And just for this podcast, I watched the first 2 episodes of Tim Allen's comedy, The Last Man Standing, because I found out. Yeah, I know. First of all,
I've seen it.
I've discovered that one, I don't find Tim Allen funny anymore just by like watching some of his older stuff, including like the Santa Claus. I'm like, why do I want this man to be Santa? Anyway, that's not the point. Point is, what Last Man Standing did was they decided to like skip ahead to 2023. And so they addressed the pandemic at the very beginning of the first episode with like a baby shower that's like over Zoom and talk of quarantining and some like vlog that Tim Allen's character does where he decides to not shave. Also, it's actually kind of depressing that Last Man Standing thinks it's going to be 2023 until we're done with the pandemic.
And what happens if they're wrong, right? Like what happens if we're still doing this then?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's just that they're skipping ahead. One, according to like, I think one of the writers, at least, our showrunner. So I read one of the interviews. They're skipping ahead because they didn't want to deal with the pandemic in the same way that other shows are dealing with it head on in current time, even though they said they plan to address how it like affected some of the characters. But 2, they didn't want to deal with the baby on set, so they skipped ahead. So the baby is now
every other show just ages the baby.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Parks and Rec did the same.
Yeah.
Parks and Rec basically did the same thing to skip ahead to like not do a repeat storyline of Leslie starting a new job and dealing with babies.
Yeah.
So they skipped ahead with toddlers and having her already comfortable with her job. And then they predicted 2017. And let me be honest, I want to live in the Parks and Rec 2017 more than I want to live in our current. I mean, we're over 2017.
But see, the difference there is Parks and Rec was always a more the irreverence there, the craziness of Parks and Rec, which by the way is a better show than Last Man Standing, but
every show is a better show than Last Man Standing.
For what Last Man Standing is trying to do, it is, and I don't necessarily agree with the politics, but it's a highly political show that is trying to address currency through Tim Allen's eyes. And you're essentially giving that up if you're in the future, right? Because they don't know what political scandals or strife we're going to be dealing with in 2023. So now they're just out of, so for the show, for people who don't know, he is very, very right wing on the show, and has one daughter who is very left wing. And then everybody else just is more or less in the middle, leaning towards him because they're afraid of him. But like, that's a lot of the plot lines of the show. And you just lose that now.
He went on and on about the greatness of Ronald Reagan defeating communism, which in this current moment seems quite tone deaf in particular. And also there was a plot line in the second episode, which has nothing to do with the pandemic, but I'm going to tell you because I'm annoyed about it anyway. About like there are these 2 annoying middle-aged men characters, and they went on and on about how like this female-heavy like superhero television show was terrible, and it didn't compare to Toxic Titans, which I guess, given their toxic masculinity, I appreciated the name correlation. That's the one thing I appreciated from the show. Anyway, I don't think it was trying to say this, but it was like, these men are terrible.
I think I've seen enough of them, and I'm not a huge fan of the show. I've watched several episodes from various places during the series run when I was looking at it for some other reason, and they're clearly. It's consistent enough that they know, even though I know Tim Allen is the producer, even though I know he is conservative in real life, he clearly knows that he's writing a show about a horrible person. Like, he knows that his character is not good, because it's consistent enough and he loses often enough to now. I think he thinks it's more of a lovable father who's not bigoted, but brash. Like I think he thinks he's doing like an Al Bundy kind of thing. as opposed to a Carol O'Connor kind of thing, an Archie Bunker kind of thing. Like that's what he thinks he's doing. But he's aware that he's aware that his character is an asshole. Like he definitely knows.
No. To be fair, I'm not talking about Tim Allen's character. I'm talking about the husband and like some other guy who runs a podcast with him of the daughter. And I just
okay.
Yeah. And I'm just like, but what if you? I mean, to be fair, they're men on a podcast about superheroes, which I realize describes our podcast to some degree. But also like, there's that stereotype. So I know that they're playing with it, but also at the same time, like, but what if you divorced your husband? Because I wouldn't be able to put that on a daily basis. Anyway, that was like one way to deal with the pandemic, like just to acknowledge that it like had a huge effect while being able to tell a different storyline. I guess we'll see how it works out. I guess like now that we've talked about some of the options that TV has done to like address this, and we're about to talk about like the big film lockdown HBO Max release. But I kind of wonder, and we can maybe talk about this in relation to lockdown, will we want to watch any of these seasons ever again after this season? I mean, like The Bachelor.
I mean, okay, there's like two aspects of this. It's like, one is, do you want to watch it as a person who watches television? Which I think is an interesting question, and I think highly variable depending on especially like what your experience of 2020/2021 is. But the other thing is also like, as like artifacts of cultural history, like even if they're not necessarily like fun TV viewing, like I think that's like they're hugely important as part of like cultural record.
Right. But then the question is, who's TV being produced for? Is it being produced for the masses, or is it being produced for, us? Right. Because we're weird.
Well, but also in this case, I think that there's some overlap, like, because like, for example, I mean, this is kind of a trite example, but like, there's like people going on Twitter. It's like, how you could explain this to like, for example, your children or your grandchildren who didn't live through this. Like media is one way to do that. Like, and I think especially like, I think there's going to be overlap between like cultural researchers looking back, 50, even 100 years from now, like trying to reconstruct what this moment, like the significance of this moment. But I think also like even with our own lifetimes, I think there's going to be a lot of explaining to others and explaining to ourselves what this experience was. I don't know if that makes it like fun.
But
viewing.
you're talking about the idea that like 21st century views of what World War II are based as much on movies about World War II as people's memories of stories told from their at this point great grandparents, right? So I mean, I guess there is that, it is a cultural record, but and maybe it just seems odd because we're living the moment while we're producing the moment.
Right. I don't know that we could really say if like it's going to be something that we care about.
Well, I mean, I'm not like, see the thing. If I'm a fan, if it's the year 2040 and I'm a fan of this old show called The Bachelorette that I found out about, right? And I go back and I'm just watching old seasons. And this is the thing that happens, right? Like, my nieces who are 14 and 10 are currently watching all of Survivor. They started a year ago with season 1 because it doesn't matter, right? They're new to them. So they're going, they don't know who any of these people are. The cultural time period. It's weird because, hey, they're watching videos from home on what are those blocky things that they're inserting into, I guess that's a TV, right? Because they've never seen VCRs before. But I mean, to them, like they know what CDs are, but like in DVDs, but like VCRs are weird. So there are cultural things that are like that are out of place for them, but they can deal with that the same way that somebody deals with a rotary phone on a show that, that came out when we were kids, right? So they understand that. But if you're doing that with The Bachelorette, right, and you're watching Bachelorette from season 1 through season 30, when in the future at some point, you're going to get to season, I don't know, what are we on? 15, 20, whatever season we're on, right? And you're going to be like, and then there was this weird season where everybody was doing weird stuff and masks and like they didn't go anywhere. It becomes bizarre, right?
But I think that is different. So the nearest equivalent I've experienced of that recently, which is different in that it's not changing people, like the way that the show is being recorded per se. Like, again, I've been rewatching all the old seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race, so it's top of mind. But like, I just recently was watching the season that was the year Donald Trump was elected, and I'm not going to lie, it made the show much more interesting. Even it wasn't a major storyline. There were constant references to like stuff that was going politically, like somebody was impersonating Melania. like, and it made the show way more interesting and compelling. I think partially because like I obviously lived through that time because I am not a child. But like, so I don't know, like I could totally see, like, for example, I mean, actually even just the same show, like the most, season 12, which I'm actually currently rewatching, and now season 13, like the filming of aspects of season 12 and now I think all of season 13 was impacted by COVID-19. I mean, honestly, I think it's interesting kind of in the moment to see like how they're dealing with that challenge. But I think also like in retrospect, I think it will be like as fascinating as sort of like the political references that are going on in the earlier seasons, just because it's like it adds a layer to the show. I don't know, that I find really compelling. I don't know if that'd be the same for The Bachelorette or these other or like Survivor, for example. But like it's interesting because I think often like reality TV feels very, I mean, like both appropriately and ironically, disjointed from the rest of the world. It exists in this little bubble, usually by design. And I think like when you have these moments, either politically or like, I mean, or with the pandemic, like it kind of grounds it in our experience in a different way than I typically associate with those shows.
I mean, Mary, do you? I guess I was thinking about rewatchability as well. Like, Mary, do you usually rewatch The Bachelor or Bachelorette, or do you just sort of like consume a season and you're done?
Consume a season, then I'm done.
True.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if like some of these shows it matters less because like, yeah, you're right, Mav, that people will go back and rewatch them if they've never seen them, but like it's not serialized in the same way that like Grey's Anatomy is. And I honestly wonder like if people like, I go back and watch like seasons like 1 and 2 of Grey's Anatomy when I want to watch something that is light. Though actually I've gotten more squeamish about the blood than I was when I was 16. I don't know. Strange. But I don't think I ever want to rewatch this season. I don't know if you feel differently, Mary.
I mean, it's been a long time since I started up. Like, I think I would have to be starting at the beginning, in it for the journey to see it all again. But I probably would not rewatch it until the show is over.
And I mean, to be fair, the reason why I might not rewatch this season of Superstore is because I'm concerned about how it's going to end. And also the big change about Superstore besides the pandemic is that America Ferrera was one of the main characters. Well, she was one of the main characters. Yeah. She wasn't the only star. But she was one of the like main characters of like the main couple, kind of like a Jim and Pam situation if we want to go to the office. And she actually was on more episodes than she was supposed to be this season because of COVID. But she's gone now. And now like the other main character, Jonah, is just really sad because his really long-term relationship ended in a really like very quickly, actually, in a way that I feel like I didn't want to watch for 6 episodes, but feel like if they were going to end it, should have addressed it over time instead of like 1 episode to say goodbye. And so I might just like end the show and see on the previous season, like because it like shut down production and they didn't film the finale. Because it's just sad. I just want characters to have a happy ending. That's why it's so hard for me to watch Grey's Anatomy. If if I heard the show or if you are my sister, because my favorite characters were either ruined by characterization or they're dead. A lot's happened on Grey's Anatomy. I don't know.
I mean, so if you're talking about something like Grey's Anatomy and addressing it, or these other shows, like Hannah, you had us watch a film that you mentioned earlier, Lockdown, which is a film produced by HBO after the pandemic started, that deals directly with it, that is trying to specifically address this moment. And I think this goes more into Katya's question, because I think I would watch this film outside of pandemic times. I actually liked it.
Oh, I hated it.
You hated it? I'm going to have a caveat here. I expected this to be awful. Like, you pitched it as something we should watch for the show.
I did.
And from the ads for it, I thought it would be a very different movie than it was. I thought it was just going to be a rom-com about being locked inside, which in some ways it was, but
it was not rom-com.
Also,
it was not rom-com.
I mean, it had elements of that, and the ads made it look like that, but it's really a heist movie.
It's also not a heist movie. It's also really more of a like people slowly going mad.
Insane?
Like in their own homes, because they're tortured by their internal demons and global capitalism. And I'm serious. Like that they really like they make sure you understand that capitalism is the villain. Like the plot, the heist plot is constructed to the point that there is no arguable reason why they shouldn't do the heist, and it's specifically because rich people are evil and do bad things.
Yeah, this is another one of those. You know, there might have to be a spinoff show of our show that is just, in particular, me and you, but like all of us. But you know, it's the let's review obscure movies. You know how we had the one episode devoted all to the Queen's Gambit, but everybody watched the Queen's Gambit. And so, you know, it was interesting. And we did one about Avengers Endgame, but everybody watched Avengers Endgame. I have so much to talk about with just this film, because you're right. Like the weird Marxist argument that it tries to make in relation to the mental health aspect that capitalism hurts versus how we view issues of race and class in times of, you know, who gets a second chance and who doesn't, and then played against the pandemic. There was so much going on. Yeah. That's why I'm surprised you didn't like it. I mean, it certainly is not a boring movie. No,
well, in some ways it actually kind of is. In the same way that Grey's Anatomy is kind of boring right now, because like it's like being trapped inside and like you're slowly like dying inside. Which I honestly felt like this was the longest 2 hours of my life. For like
long,
a long
yeah,
time.
It's also long.
It is. I mean, purposefully long. Mary, you couldn't make it through 10 minutes. Right?
No, we turned it off.
And why did you turn it off?
It was just boring. I mean, oh my gosh, two people who hate each other, who are not endearing to the audience at all.
Oh, no, not at all. No. Very much not so.
Are just miserable together and complain in the first 10, 15 minutes, and that's it. That's a hard pass for me. Like, it was a little too real, too negative. And I think the difference between like Lockdown and Grey's and This Is Us and, you know, The Bachelor, Bachelorette is like, I know those people on Grey's Anatomy. I was 10, 11 when I started watching it. Like, I'm committed. Mm-hmm. But like, these are just strangers who are terrible.
Yeah.
Living through a terrible thing that we're all experiencing.
Yeah. It's also like Josh liked it. I think, I can't tell. He was like, but I wonder if it's too soon. And I said, but would anyone watch this movie like a couple years from now when this is over? Because it's like genuinely upsetting and it feels like you're living this because you are, but then you're doubly living it on screen. And I feel like someone like saw all those tweets about couples getting like divorces and wanting to kill each other during quarantine. Remember that trope early on in all this? Mm-hmm. And they thought, oh, what if I made a movie about a couple's relationship breaking down before the pandemic and the pandemic bringing them together, except make it miserable?
Katya, did you watch it or no? Mm-mm. Okay, because I'd be really curious as to your take, because it really is exactly the thing that you were talking about, right? Like this is a movie where they are trying. I mean, I can't say Mary is wrong for her review at all, right? Like everything that she said is absolutely correct about this film, because it's not trying to entertain anybody so much as it is to capture everything about the moment that is March-ish of like around March of the year 2020. Like literally, we're going to get this. This is exactly that world. So we need to deal with the beginning of lockdown, the uncertainty, the problems with the economy that were already going on, what it means to live in a global marketplace controlled by .com superstores. Like it's literally it's not really trying to be romantic or fun or happy. They are not likable people. I will say I enjoyed it, and there are lots of twists and turns. And by the end, okay, spoilers for this movie that probably most of our audience won't listen to, but they do end up together at the end. And I was happy for them that they ended up together. They're still not likable. You get to the end of the movie and everyone's like, oh, okay, fine. But yeah, you're kind of shitty people. You happen to be, I guess, morally right because of where my politics happen to lie. And also because the movie has constructed this odd fiction of unlikely circumstances to put them in a place where Hannah is right and that you have to root for them because the bad guy is capitalism. So it's not so much that they've become wonderful. It's that, no, they're on the right side conveniently because the plot has placed them there. But it's not about entertaining. It's about like it really is this movie that is about thinking about this weird circumstance that I think you could make the movie outside of COVID time, right? Like you could construct a movie which is about a married couple getting divorced, but also deciding to do this heist because capitalism is evil, and no one would have looked at it because it wasn't COVID time, right? Like no one would have paid attention to this movie. I would have, right? Like if you told it to me like that, I'd go like, oh, okay, I'll watch this. But like it just wouldn't have had any real eyeballs on it, I don't think.
I will say that the one thing that made this movie interesting about like its use of the pandemic is that the pandemic is what triggers Anne Hathaway's character to like look at herself.
Yeah.
And like reevaluate her life and how she fits into, I'm going to just go ahead and say it, despite the cliche, the machine of capital, and how like she has become someone that she sees as a villain, and the pandemic becomes the mirror. And I think that like that has become the case for a lot of people who have now recognized that, oh, like normal was real bad for a lot of people. But we're now just recognizing how bad it actually was because we can't hide from it anymore because the pandemic affects everyone, albeit some people did more disproportionately than others.
So, yeah, and it's Anne Hathaway and like, again, I can never say his name, Chiwetel Ejiofor, I think that's how you pronounce it, are the leads. And both of them do this, right? Like, I do think that I think you're right in that the film is constructing this world where the pandemic has forced them to reevaluate their lives. But to Katya's point, isn't that, and I don't want to say good, but isn't that the interesting thing about what 2020 was, right? Like there was a lot of that, not just, I mean, for lots of people who have never dealt with it before, like there was a lot of regular people dealing with, well, you know, what have I become? You know, do I want to deal with my mental health problems? Do I want to deal with my career? Do I want to deal with now my marriage, my relationship? Like, I don't think that's unrealistic. So as a social statement about what the pandemic era, the COVID era was, or is in that we're still in it. But like, will you look back at this we won't because we'll have lived it. But will this be an interesting relic for, intro to film students or film, to study in 2045?
I don't know. Maybe we need to wait until the pandemic is over and in 5 years revisit this kind of media. I'm not kidding. Assuming we have a show in 5 years. But like I feel like it's kind of like when we did our episode on the week of January 6th. It's like, I mean, what can you say that when you're like in it? That I mean, some of it's not completely useless, but there's the Crown on Netflix. The showrunners claim they're not going to do present day because they want some like critical distance from the royal family in covering those events. Well, on the other hand, I don't know if anyone wants to ever do a pandemic movie ever again. After this over.
I mean, I'm sure they will.
They will.
And I mean, this is the first one out the gate, right? So there's been TV. Katya, at the very beginning, you asked about the turnaround times. Hannah, you looked this up. This movie was filmed in like 14 days or something.
So it was filmed in 18 days, and the leads did not have all their lines memorized. So
you can tell. You can tell.
You can tell, and also like you can understand why if you watch more than 10 minutes. And I don't judge anyone who turns it off because, again, I would not have finished it if it weren't for the show. But like they have some very, very long monologues. Rants.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a reason that like an eighth of the dialogue is poetry read off a phone screen.
Well, and I mean, again, I liked it. I don't know that I can recommend this. This is like, we did our episode on cuties where I'm just like, this is a very specific kind of thing. This is a moment in time, and it's dealing with people who are losing their minds, right? Like they're losing their minds. And so it becomes like the fact that their lines aren't quite memorized more or less reads like, I don't know what to say because I'm in this situation where I'm going crazy, living with my soon to be ex-wife or ex-husband. And this is frustrating. And so it comes across like that in a weird way. And then there are weird unresolved plot lines and themes where the movie, amongst the dealing with the pandemic and the breakup of their marriage and are they still in love with each other, it's also trying to deal with should or should not drugs be legalized and different penalties for Black people versus white people in the criminal justice system and questioning your sexuality. And there's so much going on that is just sort of there's a subplot where Anne Hathaway's character had a lesbian experience at some point. It's not shown. It's not glamorized salaciously or anything. It's just odd background for her character that doesn't really affect the plot in any way, shape or form other than you learn about it oddly. And then there's a subplot of him trying to find a job, which, having trouble finding a job because he's got a record as an ex-con, which affects the plot because it gives him motivation. But again, not really. It's just that they wanted to talk about the unfairness of how we treat Black men with criminal records.
So
it's weird.
I will tell you something, and if it might make more, the script might make more sense once I say it. This movie was written by Stephen Knight, who most recently wrote the Anne Hathaway vehicle Serenity, which is the greatest film ever created. But
wow.
Also, perhaps the strangest film ever created, where every actor is acting in a different genre, and it's a retelling of Moby Dick with virtual reality. Yep.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, and now it suddenly all comes together.
Yeah, no.
So anyway,
did not realize that.
Well, it seems like, as in all timelines, we have resolved nothing.
Well, I think we've all resolved that Last Man Standing is not on anyone's watch list in a normal day.
No, I can never recommend that. There is one episode that I probably end up watching this season. And again, I've seen the show a dozen times in however many years it's been on the air. I am very curious in that they are apparently doing an episode that is a crossover with Home Improvement.
Oh, I watched that one.
Which also starred Tim Allen, and he's going to play both characters, and they're going to meet. And I've seen screenshots of them, their production stills of filming it. And I am curious about it because that seems weird. And apparently, again, this is something that came together because they had more time on their hands during pandemic and to work it. But apparently, he doesn't own that show. He owns his show. And there were lots and lots and lots of meetings to get the rights to the character so that they could do this. And I'm just curious. I don't think it'll be good, but I'm curious. So I can't recommend watching Last Man Standing. I don't want to say I recommend watching Lockdown, but I kind of hope some of our listeners do because I want people's opinions in the comments. So if you watch Lockdown, let us know your thoughts in the comments below this episode because I really want to know what people make of it.
I mean, I think Superstore is still pretty good and probably is the best example I've seen of pandemic TV that also is not depressing. I can't recommend the season of Grey's Anatomy unless you want cry a lot. Can you recommend anything, Mary?
I 100% endorse the Bachelor/Bachelorette franchise as
I knew you were going to do this.
From, the non-drama filled individual lives that I think a lot of us are experiencing. I go to work and I come home and that's about it. Hardly see anybody, but here there's so much interpersonal drama.
You go to work?
Yeah, outside your house. So I guess maybe I have a little bit more interaction than some people, but yeah, you want something to think about. Bachelor/Bachelorette franchise, but also I think This Is Us has had a solid season. Sure, it makes me cry, but it's a heartwarming, generous cry.
So do you not watch Superstore because it's too close to your reality?
No, I just, haven't really gotten there yet.
Oh, I have an update about pandemic affecting our entertainment.
Movies rescheduling?
Yep. So if you're keeping up with our box office game, because I'm doing this. So actually, even more movies have changed since I last texted the group chat. So Quiet Place has been, and The Kingsman and Morbius have all been pushed back. Morbius is going to 2022. Mm-hmm. A Quiet Place and Kingsman have been pushed back to like the fall.
Has Morbius officially been moved to 2022? They moved it and they weren't sure.
According to Box Office Mojo, I'll put this in the show notes. Peter Rabbit 2, June 2021. Mm-hmm. Ghostbusters Afterlife, November 2021. Yeah. Uncharted, February 2022. Yep. Last Night in Soho, October 2021. Addams Family has actually moved up.
Interesting.
A week.
I'm interested by the ones that are moving up. I want to know the rationale.
How the fuck is Katya going to win this game again?
And No Time to Die is moved to October, and Bios moved to August.
Joy and serendipity, apparently, that works out. I don't know. I lost Uncharted.
Yeah. I have not lost any movies yet, which is a lot better than I was doing last time.
Right. I think
I won't.
I think that it just reinforces the fact that playing the box office game in a time of pandemic is a roulette wheel that is perhaps on acid.
No, that should be random. You shouldn't just do well because like the fact that you won randomly for the first time. OK, I get. But like, how are all of my movies moving to next year and your movies are moving
because
to?
You pick responsible.
Let's give her a lead early.
I guess movies that people expect to make money. I pick movies that are probably ill-advised choices where everyone just sort of shrugs and goes like, well, OK. Well, I don't know. That's all I got.
I think that this is going to be a roller coaster of a year. I'm personally not going to theaters, which actually AMC dropped a survey in my box and they're like, what will it take to get you back to theaters? And I was like, a vaccine.
A vaccine, right. Like it's gonna take a while.
Yeah.
We gotta stab a lot of people in the arm.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess since you're not going to the movies, you've got time to watch Lockdown on HBO Max or something. Anyway, Mary, thanks for joining us. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
And then I think you've just been silently laughing at us for the past 3 minutes.
I mean, that's fun.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
Anything that you want to plug?
If you guys are sick of looking at the same old art you have in your house, you can shop new art from Kentuck Art Center in Northport, Alabama. www.kentuck.org/shop.
We'll link that in the show notes like we do whenever Mary's on the show. Katya.
You can find me on Instagram at JustThatNerdKid. I haven't posted anything in over a month. We'll see. We'll see.
Palindrome Hannah.
You can find me nowhere doing nothing. But we'll link to Feeding America in the show notes, which is what I'm going to just be plugging until I don't know when.
I hope they appreciate you because you do give them your plug every week, which is nice.
It's literally the least I can do.
Let's see. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all of the places, always at Chris Maverick. You can follow the show in all those same places, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, always at Vox Popcast. You can follow the show if you enjoy the show, and we certainly hope you do. Then subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from. And do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. If you leave us a 5-star rating, that helps. If you leave us a 5-star review where you write a little something about what you like about the show and the dangers of capitalism during a pandemic, and that's always fun. And you write Quirky Little Marx's show all about the dangers of capitalism in a pandemic, 5 stars. Yeah, there. I've written it for you. Just type that out. That gooses the algorithm, makes us more popular, helps the show out. And also subscribe to us on YouTube. On YouTube, you get an enhanced version of the show with the same audio content you're listening to, plus pictures and images of, and clips of whatever we're talking about. That's always fun to look at. I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. I'd once again like to thank Mary for joining us. I'd like to thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.